Hey, it's Reese, and today I'm going to be going over how to change the leading edge bladder on an Aluula kite. And the reason why I'm doing this is because Aluula kites don't actually have a zipper to change the bladder with, so there's a special way to do it, and I'm going to cover that in this video. So you might be asking, why do Aluula kites have no zipper on the leading edge? And the reason for that, there's actually a few reasons. One of the reasons is that the zipper is heavy, and Aluula kites are supposed to be lightweight, so by eliminating the zipper, it saves a decent amount of weight on the leading edge of the kite. The second reason is, the zipper is the most common spot to break on the leading edge of a kite. It's actually a weak point, because of all the stitching and like the zipper and everything. When you slam your kite on the ground, oftentimes that is the first spot to explode on the leading edge. So, getting rid of the zipper gets rid of that weak point. 3, the zipper teeth actually often snag the bladder as you're pulling it into the leading edge, and they can actually damage the bladder or pop the bladder. 4, Aluula kites are being designed now to inflate to higher pressures than normal kites, and in the future, especially as the pressure of the kites gets higher and the leading edge gets smaller, the zippers can't actually hold that pressure anymore. So yeah. So if there's no zipper on the leading edge to change your bladder, how are you going to do it? We're going to pull the bladder out through the hole where the valve is that you use to inflate your kite. And I'm going to show you how to do it. Okay, so step 1, you're going to want to unwind your lines and keep the ends clear so they don't get all tangled up with the rest of your lines. Once your lines are unwound, you're going to want to walk one line to one wingtip and one line to the other wingtip. On the inside of the wingtip, there's a little Velcro tab, so you're just going to want to reach in and undo the Velcro with your thumb, and then you can slide that flap of material out. And inside there should be the end of the bladder. And on the end of the bladder there's a little hole, and what you're going to want to do is take your pigtail, or the line that you're going to use, and you want to push it through that hole. And so I'm just going to remove the pigtail to make it easier for me to do that. Oop. Don't lose your pigtail. You're going to want to push the end of the line through this hole. There we go. Once the line is through the hole, you just want to tie it off so that the line doesn't fall out of the hole again. So I'm just going to do a little bowline to stop that from happening. Alright, so once you've got your lines tied off to the ends of your bladders, you're going to want to disconnect your one pump system. So what you're going to want to do is remove the tube from the valve on the leading edge. So basically, you're just going to work it off. Nice and gently. And then pop the tube off. Don't lose your little bit. Push the valve into the leading edge like this, so that the valve is now inside the leading edge of the kite. And then you're going to want to repeat this process for however many struts you have. Okay, so all of that was pretty standard bladder changing stuff for any normal kite up until this point. This is where stuff gets weird because we're gonna start working with the valve now. So on an Aluula kite, instead of pulling the bladder out through the zipper, we're gonna now pull the entire bladder out of where the main inflation valve is. So what you want to do is get in there with your thumbs and separate the valve on the inside. So it's actually Velcroed from the inside onto the leading edge. So you want to separate the valve from the Velcro. It's a little tricky, this part. So you just want to get in with your thumbs and separate the valve just like that. The next thing you want to do is kind of flip the valve on its side so it's at 90 degrees to the hole that you just separated it from. And you want to kind of squeeze the valve into a C shape. And gently work it up through the hole. Boom, valve is out. So what you're doing with this, once you've disconnected it from the leading edge inside the kite, is you're turning it on its side like this, and then you're kind of getting in there and squeezing it into a shape like this so that it actually fits through the hole. So now that we've got this main inflation valve out of the leading edge, the next step is to pull the entire bladder out of the kite. So you'll do one side at a time. So just weigh down the wingtip of the kite. I'm just going to use this chair. And then come back to the valve and start to work the bladder out of the leading edge. All right, first side is out. My line is here. You're gonna wanna untie the line, but you do not want this line to go back inside the leading edge because that's gonna be super annoying. So make sure that this line does not go back inside the leading edge. Put something on it if you need to stop it from going in. So you've pulled the bladder out. This is what you should have now. You should have one line coming from one end of the kite and another line, whoops, coming from the other end of the kite. And now what you're gonna do is use these two lines to pull the bladder, the new bladder, back into the leading edge. So that's why you do not want these to go back into the kite before you've connected them to the new bladder. And the next step we're gonna do is flatten out the leading edge on one side of the kite. We're not gonna do both sides at once. We're gonna start with one side, get that nicely done, get the bladder put back in to that side, and then we're gonna move on to the next side. So this is what your leading edge should look like, nice and flat. All the holes for the valves pointing upwards. So when I say the leading edge should be nice and flat, it should be, the seam should be away from the canopy and the seam should run along kind of a straight line, just like I've done here, all the way down to the wingtip of the kite with the leading edge pressed flat down like this. This is what not flat would look like. The seam is like in the middle. That's not gonna work. Okay, so the leading edge is flat on that side of the kite, so now I'm gonna line up the bladder with that side of the kite, and I'm also going to make the bladder lay flat. Alright, so we've got one side of our leading edge laid out nice and flat. The other side doesn't matter right now. And we've got this equivalent side of our bladder laid out flat as well. And what I've done here is I've just put the bladder in line with the leading edge, like this. Normally this step of putting the bladder back into the leading edge would take 2 people, but using this technique here, I'm actually going to be able to do it with 1 person, and I'm going to be pulling the leading edge of the kite over top of the bladder instead of pulling the bladder through the leading edge of the kite with the line. So we need to weigh down the line coming out of the end of the wingtip. So here's the line that's coming out of the wingtip of the kite, and I just want to weigh this down. So I'm going to use this here and just put this on top of the line. Now what we're going to want to do is take the line that's coming out of the side of the kite that you're working with right now, and we want to reconnect this line to the new bladder. So same thing as before, just take the line and push it through the hole on the end of the bladder. And tie it off again. And the next step is pull the leading edge of the kite over top of the bladder and feed it into the leading edge of the kite, making sure that everything stays flat so that you're not getting any twists in the leading edge of the bladder. Pull the leading edge so that it gets the bladder. When you get to a valve, just make sure that you get the valve in nicely and continue. You want to make sure that the bladder and the leading edge remain flat the whole time you're doing this, and you just want to keep pulling it until you get to here. You want to stop at the valve. So you don't want to put the valve into the leading edge at this point. So we want to find the valves that go through these holes and connect to the one pump system. And we want to pop them back through the holes, and that will kind of lock the bladder in place. So the valve, you can just kind of feel around for it. Mine is like right here. It's about 3 inches off from the hole. So what you can do is come back over here and just kind of gently slide the bladder a few inches back, and there it is. Here's the valve, and you just want to poke it back through, and you don't want to pinch any of the bladder when you pull it back through the hole. So just make sure that none of the actual bladder is being pinched by the valve when you pull it through the hole. So You want to find your valve. Mine is right here. Get it into the hole. See, there's bladder coming out as well, and so I need to get rid of that. So there's a little lip, so you just want to pop the lip over the leading edge of the kite, and we're not going to connect the tube yet. So just leave it like this, and once you've done all of these for this side of the kite, you are done on this side of the kite for now. You should have about this much bladder sticking out of the end of the wingtip. That's totally fine. You can just untie the line at this point. Fold over the bladder end on the wingtip and reinsert that back into the leading edge of the kite as well. So you can just kind of put this excess material back into the kite. And you want to leave about, you want to basically line up, you'll see there's a weld line on the bladder, and you want to line up that weld line with this flap of material. And then just fold that over, and then fold it over like this, and like this. Like so, and then you can insert this back into the kite with your thumb. Seal it off, and there you go. All done this side of the kite. Okay, so we finished inserting the bladder into the first half of the kite, and now we just need to repeat the process for the second half of the kite, but there's a little trick for that as well. So what you're going to want to do is start by laying the bladder out flat over top of the first half of the kite that you've already done. So we're going to take the bladder, and it is going to be valves pointing down this time. And you're just going to lay the bladder out nice and flat over top of the section of the kite that you've already inserted the bladder into. Next step, we're going to lay the other side of the leading edge out flat as well. So the trick for installing the bladder in the second half of the leading edge by yourself is you're going to grab the end of the bladder and you're going to fold the bladder over itself and pull it along until you get to the start of the main valve hole. So now you're going to want to connect the second line to the other end of the bladder here. Alright, so this is what you should have at this point. You should have your bladder folded over itself with the end tied off to the line, and the other half of the leading edge of the kite laid out nice and flat. At the wingtip, I'm just weighing down the line that's coming out with this chair so that it doesn't move when I pull the kite over the second half of the bladder. Now we repeat what we did for the first half of the kite. I'm going to start pulling the leading edge of the kite over the bladder. because I have such limited space to do this, I'm just readjusting the kite when I run out of room, and you just want to make sure that you keep the bladder nice and flat before you can continue after readjusting the kite. Once again, when you get to the main inflation valve, you're just going to want to stop and leave it outside of the tube for now. Once again, let's locate our one pump valves. This one is right here, nice and easy. Make sure no bladder is being pinched. And now we'll do the last wingtip, so just untie the line. Push the excess bladder into the leading edge. Fold the bladder over at the weld line. Fold the tip in. And again. And then reinsert the tip into the leading edge of the kite so that the Velcro reconnects nicely, and there you go. Okay, so we're gonna put the main inflation valve back into the leading edge, basically the same way we took it out. We're gonna turn it on the side and squeeze it into a C shape and push it back into the kite. Just like that. And then you want to line it up, make sure that none of the bladder is going to be pinched when you Velcro it back on. And then push it on, just like that. And you're done. So the last thing to do is to reconnect the one pump system. So you're just going to take the little plastic bit here that you have from earlier, slide it onto the hose, and then connect the end of the hose to the one pump valve on the leading edge. And then the trick here to get this plastic bit back onto the valve and lock the tube in place is to actually pull on the tube and with one hand and slide the little knob on with the other hand. So you just pull on the tube and there you go. Then you're just going to want to give the leading edge of the kite a once over. Make sure that there are no weird wonky bits. Make sure that the bladder is not twisted inside of the leading edge. You want to make sure that your one pump valves are all coming out of the hole nice and they're not being pulled in different weird directions, because that's a good sign that your bladder is actually twisted inside of the leading edge. All of my one pump valves look good. I don't see any weird creases along the leading edge, and I think I'm pretty happy with it.